the event rather than here at the beginning. We're going to start having a conversation, as I mentioned, with Andrew and Peter about the experience of actually their experience in general with the Sheep and Trees grant scheme. And then Andrew Kitching from Scottish Forestry is going to be talking a little bit more about the different schemes. And we're going to be answering questions towards the end. But again, as usual, it can be a bit it's a bit easier sometimes to ask the questions as they come. Feel free to put them in the chat. I think I've chatted enough. I'm going to do the formal presentations. Andrew Whiteford, if you can just wave and let us all know. Hello. Andrew is a farmer in Burnfoot Farm. It's in Dumfries in Galloway. And he actually he applied and got the Sheep and Trees grant, as I mentioned before. So he's going to be walking us through his experience, but he did it with Peter Atkinson. Peter, if you could sort of like let us know, where there you go, by his side and sort of like supporting him all the way through as a consultant. So we thought that the best thing would be to have a conversation with both of you because it's just going to be a more complete vision. And again, Andrew Kitching, if at any point you want to sort of like bring some more information to the table, feel free, you just let us know or come into the conversation. So just to start, I think that the best would be to let Andrew talk us about what the farm is about, like where it is, the characteristics, and what do you do there?
Well, we farm in Sanker. We took the farm over 7 years ago, and we've got 300 suckler cows. Breed them pedigree lings, put them to Charlie bulls, Anguses and Simmentals to breed stores and replacements for ourselves. 1,500 sheep, mainly sort of flat face, and we put a percentage of them back to the blue-faced Leicester and breed them, sell the lambs, mule lambs off them, and the rest is replacements, and about 100 to 200 of them is mules that we put a textile top onto and sell them fat. We are quite a heavy farm here, a lot of rainfall, heavy clay soils, so winter for us is quite a long time, 6 to 7 months, but in the summer we can grow quite a lot of grass, so it's all about utilising the grass in the summer and trying to reduce feed costs in the winter. So that's kind of what we do here on the farm. And
that sounds great. And so how long have you been there? How long has your family been there? Is it
Yeah, so the farm here, mum and dad, they bought the farm 7 years ago, and I also farm with my sister and brother-in-law, and we have another member of staff. So it's quite it is a family-run business, predominantly with one of our member staff that is part of the team as well. So we took on the business in its entirety from the previous owner, the staff as well. But since then, various reasons, the staff they've moved on, and we've had to sort of take it on ourselves. But it's been a few learning curves. We were actually dairy farmers before we came up here, so it's kind of a different sort of mindset. It's trying to make the two sides of the business work, sheep and cattle working together, and then also trying to get other income streams and trying to make the most of the land here. We have quite a lot of, it's 3,500 acres, but 2 to 2.5 of that is just pure hill ground. So it's trying to get the most out of that, but then make the most of the good pasture ground, try and help the animals perform.
That's good. And so, how did you end up deciding, because it feels like you already had an awful lot on your plate talking about sort of like this learning curve and everything. How come you decided to actually start flirting with the idea of trees in your farm with all this on top of it?
Well, there's quite a lot of existing forestry here as well. I think there have been various environmental schemes in the past that were done by the previous owner. Riverbanks have been fenced off and trees have been planted. Various areas of land have been shut off, and small areas of trees and shrubland created. But also must have been, well, 30 to 40 years ago, there have been a few woods that have been planted. So we already had the existing quite a few. Must have been 150, 200 acres of woodland, I think, was already there. So, which we never really thought of when we bought the farm. When you buy the farm, you're thinking, oh, what's the agricultural productivity here? How many cows can I have? How many sheep can I have? You know, how can we really push this farm? And we did do a lot on increasing the productivity of the land, draining it, putting a lot of lime, correcting all the soil pHs and indices of potassium and potash and stuff like that. So it was kind of a bit of an afterthought, and then it was like, actually, this stuff's ready to fell. A lot of the stuff could have been, and we're like, oh, there's actually some real potential value here, and especially also in the press, there's a lot of talk about forestry and the benefits of that, and then there was, obviously, we heard about grant schemes. So I think my father got in touch with Peter, and we kind of went forward from there and just looked at what do we think the best option for our farm is to push that side of the business as well.
So Peter, you were contacted. Was it like a broad ask, or was there already an idea of what was going to happen?
Well, I think my first involvement with Andrew and his father was I was involved in clear felling one of the spruce commercial blocks, which is about 18 hectares, and that was my sort of first involvement with them. So I organised the license to fell and the restocking, and I did the felling, and then there was, I think it was actually something in the farming press about the forestation scheme, sheep and trees, and Robert, Andrew's father, rang me and said, "What do you know about this?" I said, "Well, I had seen something about it, but I didn't know a huge amount. But give me a day or so, and I'll have a bit of a read up and see what it can be." Because it was something that we'd sort of talked round about the opportunity for increased afforestation on the farm, because the farm is, it's 2,500 acres of hill, and there's a lot of forestry in our part of the world, and it sits within the preferred location in terms of planting and therefore financial grant. It gets the higher level of grant. So it was something we'd spoken about, and then the sheep and trees scheme came up, and that really was ticking quite a lot of boxes, because one of the things with the sheep and trees is actually that it gives you grant for the infrastructure for roading as part of the scheme. And the Whitefords Andrew does have the best part. I think it's about 40 hectares of mainly Sitka block on its own, which was planted probably about 30 years ago, but it doesn't really have an access to it. There isn't. The old extraction route was across a bridge that you wouldn't want to take an ATV motorbike on it, never mind try and put a timber truck on it, and there was no roads. So the fact that sheep and trees gave us this infrastructure, that was ticking a lot of boxes. So that's how, when Robert had said to me about it and I looked into it, I thought, well, this really is a good scheme. So that's how we got to where we were. And then, we started off with sort of doing some office-based survey work to look at location and look at things like, the vegetation, any archaeology, landscaping, fishery interests, and I did some broad brush budgets for the Whitefords, and then they said, right, this looks as if it's going to be a goer. We should go for it, and that's when I made contact immediately with the woodland officer, because I think anybody that's considering any sort of forestry scheme, I think to get in contact with the woodland officer from Scottish Forestry at a very, very early stage can really smooth the passage through. It really does make it a lot easier, because we had various constraints within the scheme. Do you want me to keep going and explain the whole thing?
Yes, I think it's absolutely fine. And if Andrew, any of the other two Andrews want to say something at any time, just interject.
Yeah. So the sort of survey work that we're looking at is vegetation, and we're looking at soils, we're looking at archaeology, and it actually did turn up a bit of archaeology on the site where the road line was going to be. So that in itself was not a big issue in this, because it wasn't an ancient monument or anything, but we had to have engaged the services of a freelance archaeologist who came and basically stood and watched when we dug across this place, and it was called Deal's Dyke, which was some earth embankment, but there was nothing showed up, and there's not an issue about building a forest road over the top of it. So that's what we did. We also had quite a major watercourse to cross with a fishery interest, because we have not that burn itself is a spawning burn for salmon, sea trout and migratory fish, because there's a waterfall just below. But we had a major engineering. We actually ended up putting a 3.5 meter pipe into the burn and a lot of backfill. So we needed to obviously get SEPA approval for that. We had to get the local fisheries people to come and electrofish and remove any fish which were upstream and downstream of where the pipe was going to go in, and then we just locate them further downstream, and then the pipe went in. In terms of the road, all hill roads now, you need to get prior consent from the planning authorities. Again, there wasn't any major issue with that. It's a question of filling yet another form in, giving them a map, and that was passed. So it wasn't a great issue. Yeah, and then in terms of the amount of roading we put in, we actually built. Look at my figures here. We planted 49.68 hectares. Sheep and trees is restricted to 50 hectares. I think Andrew will confirm that I'm right on that. And you get so many meters of road for every hectare that you plant, up to a maximum of 1,500. We built on the scheme 1,865 meters of road, but we got 1,490 meters of grant on it, because we obviously needed to get. And what the scheme did was actually gave us access to this other block of commercial material that ready to come down any time in the next 4 or 5 years, depending whether the family want to do that, because we've actually built a road. I don't know, Andrew, whether you want to show the scheme map and people can see the layout, because it was in 2 blocks basically.
Let me put it here. Here we go. So is that the one, or you can tell me if there's a next one as well? That's a cultivation map.
I can't see it actually. It's a species, the species map. Let
me see if, why can I see it? Typical online event. For new planting species map, is that the one?
That's the one, but I can't see it actually.
It says sharing on my side. Can you guys see it?
I can see it.
You can see it. You can see it. Everybody else can see it. That's fine. Yeah. So I'll go the old method, and I'll get the paper copy out. It was in 2 blocks basically, one to the south of the main, the existing woodland, and then a fairly larger block of pure Sitka up on the top, and the road comes and joins the bottom block, and then obviously ties into the top compartments, which are 6 and 7. So we've now got a road, you know, that will assist in the harvesting of the existing block when it gets felled in a few years' time. A lot of fencing. We had 2,500 meters of fence on the scheme. Ground cultivation, the vast majority was done with continuous mounding. Some excavate and mounding on the broadleaf areas in compartment 5, and a little bit of shallow ploughing in compartment 5 on the more mineral soils, which is acceptable. I would say that was about the only slight difference of opinion Andrew Kay and I had was about the cultivation on the top, because of there's a shallow peat there, and there was a bit of a concern there about ploughing with peat. So we continuously mounded, and it's done quite well actually. So there's no great problem there. A lot of open drainage, obviously, to remove the water off the site, because we are in a fairly wet part of the country. You know, where somewhere between 12 and 1,500 millimeters of rain a year up there. So it's pretty wet, and it's mineral glaze, and there was peaty glaze up on the top of compartments. Species were.
I think, yeah, I was going to ask you about species and how do you approach that? Because in that area, it must be. How do you even start with that and deciding what the species are?
Well, within the forest, within Scottish Forestry, there's a map planner, and it'll actually give you what is considered suitable on those grounds as a guide. But obviously, you know, experienced people like me can kind of look at the ground and look at the vegetation and, you know, choose the correct species. We ended up with 74% Sitka spruce, which is near the maximum. Maximum of any one species within the scheme is 75%. So we had 74% Sitka, 13% Norway spruce, and 6% native broadleaves, sessile oak, downy birch, rowan, alder, and some willow down in the wetter bits in the south. Mm-hmm. And we had about 7% open ground, which was for landscape reasons, but also obviously the roads as well.
And Andrew, what has been your experience? What was it like, sort of like being on the ground and doing it on a daily basis? How did it go? What were the challenges that you faced through the process?
I mean, there wasn't too many challenges. There's no way we could have done this ourselves. I mean, Peter, great at what he does, and if anyone's going to do this, definitely get advice about it. I learned a lot just from going up and speaking to Peter and asking what was getting done and what needed to happen. And I mean, in terms of constructing the roads, we were actually able to use a lot of our reused old slats to create the structure of it and the strength, which was quite useful way of reusing them rather than just dumping them somewhere or having to. They were just lying around the farm, so that was quite a good way of creating strength and structure to the pipe that was going across and create stability for that, and just getting the fences up and trying to get the bit where it's supposed to be to match what was in the plan, and in terms of the planting, just trying to get all the materials to the boys that were doing that, and yeah, I mean, it all went quite smoothly and quite well to plan. So and anything that we came across, we kind of expected, or yeah, it wasn't too many major hurdles. I think there was a lot of fencing, but because it was tying into the existing woodland and tying into existing fences and boundaries, so it actually wasn't as much as there would have been if someone was to, if you were to build a new self-contained woodland on an area of the farm. I think we utilised the land that was there, and to effectively create a large, which will be a large forestry habitat in the future, not just for the commercial side of it, but the way that it's being put in now, the new woodland area that will be created over the next 10, 20 years, I think will be much better for species diversity, and the natural existing block that you'll see in the middle, that would have been put up, that would have been quite, you know, when you walk, if you ever walk through there, it's just completely like dark. But I think in terms of a woodland area, what we'll build there in the future will be much more of a balance between forestry and also environmental and species diversity. So I think what we've done here has worked quite well.
Is biodiversity something that came as a sort of like once you started doing it, it sort of like popped up, or was it part of the idea from the get-go? I
mean, in honesty, it wasn't an objective from the get-go. I'll be honest about that. But then when realizing that within the scheme you have to have, you know, like for example, you can't have more than a certain percentage of one species, so it's not as a complete monoculture. But and then I guess through recent things and recent concerns, and you understand why that was in the scheme, and you think, oh, why does there be so many open areas? That feels like it's an area that you're just wasted when you could be getting income from that. But it's not just about that. I guess what we sort of realised after we've done the project, and I think I'm more proud of the fact that there is open areas, and it is an added environmental addition to the farmland. And I think going forward in the future, we're going to be, I don't want to say forced down this way, but guided down this way. So if we embrace it and see the values in it, that you can get both a commercial addition to your farm with keeping alongside the extra addition, that it could be create a positive ecosystem around your farm. But especially if certain areas of the farm are going to have to increase in their productivity to increase efficiencies, it's good that you can target areas of the farm which are left for species as well. So yeah.
And when we were talking before the talk as well, you mentioned that you're also using the farm, the trees for your sheep. So it's also a benefit for the farm in those terms, just to provide shelter.
Yeah, I mean, when this grows, it'll provide a good shelter belt for. I mean, you can, for those that can see on the map, that there's quite a large area of land either side of it. You know, we do get can be quite stormy wet weather out here, and when this is a mature woodland for 10 or 20 years, when it's mature, it will provide good cover for sheep that are out in the hill, and also cattle as well, if it means we can create areas of land which we can keep cattle out longer. The roadways allow us to get access to our hills, which helps in managing gathering sheep, and just generally monitoring stock for animal welfare. And it's a lot more pleasant to get up, because actually when you get onto the hill, it's not too bad once you're up there. It's actually the lower ground to get up there that was really rough, quite steep gullies, and so this road effectively bypasses that. So there is positives to this scheme that have been created. I think because we can get up there, we've created rock areas of lay-bys where we could put feeding stations. Even the roadway provides a dry area if you want to give the sheep a bit of feed pre-lambing, or even when it gets too wet on the lower fields, we can put them onto the hill parks and feed them a bit of hay and put feed on the ground. So yeah, it just adds that extra dynamic to our business. Just an area of land that we can utilise when times get hard or wet. So it's useful. We never really appreciated how much it could be until the infrastructure was put in, and we're actually like, well, this is great that we can utilise this.
So are the sorry, I got a bit lost there. Are the sheep being able to go to the old dirt trees, or is it just, or is it what you're going to be doing in the future?
Sorry.
Are the sheep being able to go up the hill now, or is it something that's still in process?
Yeah. The sheep graze all graze.
Yeah,
that's
Yeah, but
sorry, that was me just absolutely losing the plot for a second. I'm just
the sheep don't graze in the wood we've planted on.
Perfect. No, neither in the, but it's right. Just I confused myself. Ignore me. There we go. I think that's an interesting question, probably for Andrew Kitching. Is there an amount of years that have to pass before the sheep can actually go in there, or is that something that the farmers get to decide themselves?
Well, what we're looking at obviously is, as part of any woodland creation scheme, there is a contract duration, and obviously what we're looking at more than anything else is making sure there's a woodland that's established. Now, my experience of sheep and trees in one aspect is that you will have a knock-on effect on the establishment of the woodland if trees go in, or should I say sheep go into the trees areas. So what we are looking for is predominantly a stock-free area, and then obviously the trees themselves, depending on the type of the scheme, will potentially have individual sheep protection. One of the grants programs that we do have is a scheme called Agroforestry, which is designed for sort of grazing and woodlands. For that, the actual stocking density is a lot less than it would be for a woodland creation scheme. So the difference being, if you were doing a native broadleaf woodland creation scheme, we're looking at 1,600 stems to the hectare. And if it's conifers, it's 2,500 stems to the hectare. Whereas in an agroforestry scheme, we are looking around about 400, well, up to about 400 stems per hectare. So there is an options available, but each of the options have different sets of criteria, and associated with that, different types of grant funding rates as well. But what we don't really have, well, as I said, from past experience, seeing sheep within a woodland setting of new establishment, the establishment is going to have a huge, the establishment rate of that area is going to have a huge impact, which means then you'll probably have a lot more maintenance to do going through in future years.
Super, thanks. Andrew, now that you already have it there and you're thinking more about the future of them, what do you think that these trees are going to bring to the farm? How do they help you diversify your business?
Well, I mean, with any forestry planting, it's an investment for the future, I suppose. So it's whenever it does come to fell, it's effectively you're doing this for potentially income that might be required for reinvestment in 40 years' time. But in the meantime, just from what I was saying about the infrastructure that it's allowed us to put in, it's allowed, well, so far this year, it's allowed us to keep cattle outside longer. We never actually grazed the hill area, until August, September. We deferred the hill grazing and made the most use of the in-by fields, because the grass growth this summer was quite good for us. Our farm being quite a wet farm, when it was a dry spring, it really dried the farm out well, and the grass grew quite a lot. So when the cattle did go to the hill, we were able to check them a lot easier because of the roadways. But then when they came off the hill, we were able to still feed on these hill parks because of the roadway that was there. So the cattle and calves stayed out a lot longer. And so when they came in, there was a lot less pneumonia problems, because we vaccinate in October, but they had a lot more chance to get a good immune response before the stressful time of coming in. So that's been a positive for the cattle side of things, and generally in terms of for the sheep enterprise, it's been very useful for gathering times and monitoring the husbandry of them. And it wasn't really a thing we were thinking about at the time when we put the trees up, but there's a kind of a whole industry, but financial trading, the whole aspect of carbon sequestration. I think that sort of came up recently, and the whole use of potentially trading carbon credits. I don't really fully understand how it works exactly, but this woodland over its lifetime is gonna like carbon capture a set amount of carbon that'll be sort of worked out, and potentially businesses that plant trees will be able to trade these carbon credits, and it'll just be potentially an extra income stream, which they would have done. This woodland would have done that anyway, but now businesses are looking to offset their environmental impact on and utilize farmland for trees and for this sort of for this. So that potentially might be another option. But I think we have to fully understand it a lot more and look into it a bit more to make sure it's right for us. And I think with the infrastructure we've put in, if there is going to be potentially a push to more environmental grant schemes, or whether the new agricultural policy in Scotland is going to be that they'll want us to create peaty wetlands up there, or fence off gullies and plant trees and create more areas for diversity on hill land, we'll have an advantage because we can get the equipment up there a lot easier now to create these areas for potentially new environmental habitats, if that is what is most suitable for our land up on the hill. So it provides there's plenty of scope for whatever policy comes our way in the future. So,
Peter, do you have any comments?
Yeah, there might be an opportunity for some income to come from thinnings on perhaps the lower compartments. I think the upper compartments with the windthrow hazard there, it wouldn't be advisable to thin there, but certainly the bottom compartments, depending on growth, I don't see any reason why that couldn't be done, silvicultural thinning. So that would provide some income from that operation in 15 years time or something.
Super. I think that we're approaching the end of the first part, and then we're going to let Andrew talk us through the Scottish Forestry grants, and we can ask him all the questions afterwards. But I think that after the whole process, it would be interesting to know what are the main things that you learned, both about the process and about planting trees in general. Andrew, you first.
Which Andrew? This Andrew.
Yes, Andrew. Andrew W. Sorry, I keep on forgetting that there's two main Andrews here. Andrew W.
Yeah.
Andrew Kitching is having all the questions asked after the presentation, so that's fine.
Yeah. So what was the question again?
So what are the main learning things that you've learned, both about the process in this particular case, but also thinking more about the future, about planting trees in the future of the farm?
Yeah, well, the main sort of things is whenever we're looking at where are we going to plant these trees, where are we going to create these areas. I thought you could just plant a tree wherever, and so the areas I was looking at, I was looking at the sort of what's most useful for the farm. Where is an area that is kind of out the way or not going to interfere. But then when you go through the process, if you're going to spend and invest this, you want the best establishment possible, and you also can't just plant on if the peat's too thick. Peter and I went out on the hill and started measuring all these areas to make sure it wasn't the peat wasn't too deep, because you can't plant there, and there was a huge scope on our hill to create a large area, but when you go too high, you're not going to get the same growth in establishment and the same quantity of wood. So in the end, we did put a bit on that lower area that you'll be able to see on the map. There's 15 hectares down there, which, yes, we do utilise it for agriculture. It's a good area that grows quite a lot of rough grazing, but when you weigh it up, I was happy to put that into the plantation as well. So that just where to plant and why, and trying to get make sure that when we're doing this, we do it right. And again, with the whole, we can't just plant all one type of species. We do have to create an area that's open areas, and just trying to get the balance right when we were going through it. Yeah, and just again, when Peter was saying about we came up against like the dike that was there, to get archaeologists in, and also with the whole making sure we didn't interfere too much with the fish that were in these waters. It's that doing the project has actually opened me up to a lot more of what's actually here on the farm. The whole investigations that we went through and everything, it does sort of broaden your mind to what's actually on our farm and the ecosystem that's there. That's quite what I probably learned most from it. Yeah.
Super. How about you, Peter? How was the experience? Because this was the first time that you were working on this particular grant, wasn't it?
It was the first time I'd done a sheep and trees for a client, but being a practitioner, I can only work within the scheme guidance, and that's one thing with Scottish Forestry. There's no shortage of guidance there, and I think having a good relationship with your woodland officer again is paramount, because you can overcome potential issues before you actually sit down and actually do the application. So if you get in your head and an agreement with the woodland officer about what you're trying to achieve, it tends to be a lot smoother and go through a lot quicker. I mean, this scheme, we started the process in April 2018, and we had a contract on the 10th of September, which in woodland creation, I mean, it's not a big scheme, but in woodland creation terms, I think that's pretty quick, actually. Some of these big schemes can take a year or 18 months to get through. So, you basically, I, as a practitioner, just have to work within the rules that are there and try and advise my clients accordingly.
Andrew, how have you seen, is this, are there more people applying for smaller grants like this, for grants for smaller spaces? That's what I mean, like this one, or do you think that's something that's gaining traction as it comes?
I'm guessing you mean myself.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I think one of the things we have is probably the nature of where we are, really. Dumfries and Galloway and southern Scotland in general is, well, as majority of the foresters will call it, the engine room of forestry in Scotland. That's predominantly because of the markets. And also it's just obviously getting access to various locations. So a lot of the schemes that we see are very much more larger scale afforestation schemes, and well, that's not to say that the smaller schemes aren't coming through. They are, but on proportion, we are probably seeing same amount of hectarage, I would have thought, some of the bigger schemes, but kind of fewer of them. So it's we tend to see some of the large schemes. So for average woodland creation schemes that I'm involved with recently are in the sort of the hundreds to 200 hectares in scale. But we also still have a couple of the smaller ones. For example, one that I've just done for Peter's not even 10 hectares. So we have a good broad brush approach. It predominantly comes down to what the objectives are for the landowner and what do they want, and obviously looking at the markets as well. So yeah, it may be different elsewhere in Scotland, but in southern Scotland it does tend to be a lot larger schemed and sort of very much more production side of things. But as I said, I think that's predominantly because of the market that there is around here.
Super. There's a few comments and questions, but I would suggest we keep them for after your presentation, Andrew Kitching. So feel free to go ahead, and then we'll also ask other questions, and it also gives people time to ask any other questions for Peter and Andrew Whiteford in the meantime, and we'll address the questions that have been coming after your presentation. So Andrew, feel free.
No problem. Do you have a copy, or do you want me to use using mine?
If you can use yours, that would be great.
No,
It tends to be
you
a bit
might
easier.
just need to hold on for a second, see if I've got the right. I think it is that one. So if everyone can see, just let me just grab this a second. So is everyone able to see that one? Is that everyone?
Yes, that's looking perfect.
No problem. So yeah, as I say, thank you. I'm Andrew Kitching. I'm one of the woodland officers that covers South Scotland. So we cover in the south. We cover the Scottish borders. We cover East and South Ayrshire, and also Dumfries and Galloway as well. I suppose really the first thing to think about when looking at woodland creation is what is it that you're looking to do and why. Obviously, it's a long-term investment. But also at the same time, it depends on what you're wanting to get out of it all as well. So we've heard you'd have heard a lot recently with regard to woodland expansion. And the drive to help plant more trees to help with the climate crisis that's about. So that's obviously can be one driver, and obviously farmers are pivotal in that aspect as well. But as we've already heard, utilising some areas of unproductive land, improving connectivity for the biodiversity side of things, but also looking at the landscape as well. Again, what is it that you want from your woodland? Sometimes it's very much investment. So it's best off working out what is your objectives. I'll come on to a range of different options that we have. So it's not a one size fits all schemes that we currently run with. But again, some schemes will be suitable for others and some suitable for other people as well. So it's not a one size fits all. As you probably heard already from Andrew as well, it's worth having to think about how much time you want to invest, but also how do you have also the knowledge and the time to actually help deliver that program. As part of woodland creation schemes, we work on a claim year, so it's a financial year, and obviously what we would look at doing is having a scheme start within a specific year, and actually delivering it within that year. That scheme, that years are negotiable. We're not saying that just because you don't meet it, it doesn't mean that you're going to sort of be excluded from the scheme, but it's just making sure that it's manageable and you're not sort of biting off more than you can chew a little bit. Another thing is, obviously, is the land suitable? As Andrew mentioned, he would like to have gone a bit further up the hill. Again, it depends on if that land is suitable, and if it's actually any sensitivities. So is there any sensitive designations on there, any sensitive sites, any rare species of bird or plants? This is all the stuff that we need to take into account. And again, as Peter kind of reiterated earlier, it's probably worth speaking to the local woodland officer to have a look at that, and they can hopefully point you in the right direction. And then obviously it's the scale. How big, how much land have you got, or how much do you want to give up, or how little do you want to give up as well? Again, it's all up to yourself. Woodland creation, it can be quite a complex process, and we do have a couple of guides that are available that will give you a little bit more idea of a process, and I'm more than happy for these slides to be presented, passed around, not a problem at all. So if you want to use the hyperlink in there, that'll give you a couple of an idea of what we're looking at as part of any application. It'll also highlight the other activities that we have to go through, such as environmental impact assessments, and also what sort of information that we are looking for as part of a scheme application as well. As I mentioned earlier, there's a number of schemes, a number of different options. So we have 9 different woodland creation options, supporting all sorts of activity. So from a conifer plantation, which is quite a large production, mainly of conifer schemes, is usually Sitka spruce, through to natives, and again, gives you an idea of the grant rates that are available. There's different criteria for each different one. So again, it's hopefully there's quite a number of different options there available. So hopefully one of those schemes would fit what you're looking to do. As was mentioned earlier, there's funding not just for the initial planting, but also there's funding support for any fencing or protection costs that will be associated with the scheme. And again, that's worth having a discussion with the woodland officer to sort of bottom those out. There's always questions about deer fencing versus tree tubes. It's that sort of activity. But again, taking advice from the local woodland officer is always useful, and can get a good idea of how we would see it within our remit. There is also an annual recurrent, which is obviously done via your SAF, and that's a 5-year payment. So that's very much for sort of maintenance and ongoing activities to maintain that woodland. As I mentioned earlier, that the woodland creation, once you've been successful and been approved, you'll be issued what we call a contract. It sounds odd always having a contract for something, but that's a 20-year contract. So that's is a program there to say that land will be under that contract for 20 years and activity there. It is a competitive process, so we do have scoring that needs to be involved. Each individual option has a slightly different scoring process, scoring criteria. So it's just worth having a look at that. And I said all this information is available to have a look at when you want. So you can have a look at the scoring and everything else. That's not a problem. And as I mentioned on the bottom there, it's a 20-year contract for woodland creation schemes. So yeah, it's worth bearing in mind. With the sheep and trees scheme specifically, it's not actually an option in itself. The sheep and trees schemes kind of amalgamates 2 funding programs for the Scottish Forestry. The first one obviously is the planting. So under the sheep and trees, it's targeted at those conifer or diverse conifer schemes. And the minimum area, so it's a block, is 10 hectares, but we can go up to 50 hectares in scale. That is the maximum, and that is just down to cost effectiveness of road networks. So yeah, as I said, there's a minimum block of 10 hectares, but we can go up to 50 hectares. As Peter alluded to, it's very much targeted towards how much we will pay a certain amount of money towards the road, and that is worked on, gives you against the size of the area that you're looking to plant. Certain schemes will require more rows, a bit like the scheme that we looked at earlier, and again, that's a discussion that we'll have with the applicant to say which elements we will pay for, and it's just usually sections of the road. So there'll be certain sections that we will pay for, and there'll be certain sections which the applicant will have to fund as well. Obviously, the funding is available to upland hill farmers, and it does actually say within the guidance where sheep are a continued and a major component of the farm business. So yeah, it's unfortunate that is one of the limiting factors. That's where it is obviously targeted towards. And obviously, it sort of provides an excellent opportunity to sort of diversify the business and bring parts of the farm back into production, where you probably hadn't had access before. One of the, as Andrew mentioned, is it's probably that track that was being built now will probably give them some access. I'm not going to say it's going to be the main access, but it'll give them some access to that existing woodland that they've got already, which I'm not surprised. It won't surprise me if in a couple of years' time that'll be coming up for some sort of thinning or even clear fell. Just one thing that people may have seen in the press, well, it'll be a few months ago now, that obviously farm woodland creation, there was some additional funding available, £1 million to help sort of farm woodland creation, and to help diversify farms. As I say, unfortunately, the project has to be completed by the March now, and I know that means that it's very, very tight. And to be quite honest, if you put an application in tomorrow, it's very difficult. Well, you will not. I'll hold my hands up now. You will not probably get a contract to get that delivered and completed before that date. I just wanted to make people aware of it. We've not been told if there's any future funding, so it's a case of I wanted to make people aware of it, but it's a case of just watch this space, and it may be something that comes out later on. But as soon as we know anything else, we'll obviously be able to pass it on, and I'm sure there'll be something in the local press and etc. about that. And one thing that has just come out recently is a new guidance that we've created for very much for small farms, and it's a bit more of a walkthrough. The two guidance documents I showed you earlier are very much quite detailed and can be quite sort of targeted very much at foresters, whereas obviously this guidance hopefully helps simplify things a little bit easier. And there is a sort of a smaller, say this is for 5 hectares or below, sort of that smaller landowner or woodland creation option. Obviously this is for schemes that are not very sensitive or not very complex. So again, to determine if your scheme is sensitive or complex, it's probably worth having a chat with a local woodland officer. They have a good understanding of where the designations are, where there's certain things that need to be considered as part of any woodland creation scheme, and some of it may even be things that probably don't know about just solely because of the local knowledge. Again, one of the main things is making sure we get the right tree in the right place. So it's making sure that we are planting on the correct and the ground preparation. Peter mentioned it earlier. The ground preparation is appropriate, and there's various things that we need to consider. There, the contact details for South Scotland. Just wanted to put a note on the bottom there that some of the documents I showed earlier, I think may not actually have the most up-to-date contact details because they may have been released prior to Scottish Forestry actually being developed or established. So it may actually be under our old Forestry Commission Scotland contact details. But as I say, all our up-to-date details are on our website. Yeah, I said it's probably worth spending the time speaking to your local woodland officer. The best thing to do, it would be to obviously contact the main conservancy mailbox or conservancy telephone number. Obviously, we're all working at home at the moment, so probably the mailbox is probably the best option in the short term. And then obviously they'll be able to guide it onto the specific woodland officer that deals with that area. Now, I'm fully aware that's probably quite a very, very brief run through of what can sometimes be seen as a complicated scheme. I think it's one of these things, it's a bit like an onion. Once you start peeling the layers through, hopefully it gets a little bit simpler. But it's such a broad brush of what we cover. It's trying to give everybody a good overview of what everything was, really. So I'm more than happy to take questions. As I say, I'm going to be here for the rest of the presentation, so that's not a problem.
Great, thank you very, very much, Andrew Kitching. And I'm going to start just asking you a first question, which Jane asked a while ago, but I think it ties up very well with this. And it's a question around what is considered a small woodland? Is it commercial forestry? Is it small areas of woodland for ecological biodiversity? Is it a size description? What exactly is considered a small woodland? Right.
It comes, well, that's a difficult one. I suppose it comes down to what it is you're looking at. Under the grants program itself, if you're looking at a conifer scheme, the smallest that we would look at is 2 hectares in size. Whereas if you are looking at a native woodland scheme, the smallest we would look at is 1/4 hectare in size. So it depends on what your objectives are and what it is that you're looking at, what scheme, your type of scheme you're looking at. What I would say, what is probably worth doing is having a word with your woodland officer, because just because you got one application doesn't mean that you've got to concentrate on one option. You can have multiple options as part of an application. So it may be that you have certain areas of under a conifer option, but then in actual fact, because you're wanting to sort of plant up any sort of gills or anything else like that, it may be that you can look at a native woodland for those specific areas. So it's not just focusing on one element. There is ways of developing a kind of a whole farm scheme in one format or another. But again, it just comes down to really what it is that you're looking to do at the end of the day.
Super. A question for the other Andrew, for Andrew Whiteford, is have the fences around the new woodlands helped you with managing the movement of the livestock and reducing livestock getting into difficult locations, for example, gills or other areas?
Yeah, it has been very useful. It's actually also enabled us to link. We've got two large hills here. One's on the far side of the woodland, and the other one's on the near side of the woodland. We used to have to handle all our cattle at the far end of the farm on sort of outside older sort of pens, but didn't have a very good crush there, and there wasn't, when it came to vaccinating calves in the autumn, we just had to sort of have a little table sat there, and cows were sort of all moving around and that, and it was a very old crush we had. But now I'm able to walk them from one side of the farm to the other. It's effectively connected an old road that was on that side of the farm to now the new roads, which has helped a lot in terms of we can bring them to the sheds and the better handling pens, which makes everything a lot less stressful for the animals, a lot less stressful for us as well. And we can sort them out into the sheds a lot easier, and just the speed that we can get to these areas. It's not as onerous a task to have to think, oh, I'm going to get through this gully and up these rough bits. And if it's heavy, in the summer you think things are going to be dry, but this summer has been heavy rain, and just takes a few drains to back up, and you're having to take a quad bike through these bits. it's a lot less onerous. We know we can get to these areas very quickly. So checking things, we can get through a lot more stuff in the summer, accessing these areas and getting around the livestock a lot more, which definitely has helped the welfare if there was any potential issues that we needed to see to. So yeah, roadways are always going to be useful, and we've definitely been able to utilise them for some positives over the last year or so. Yeah.
Peter, you look like you wanted to say something.
No.
Nope. Great. Then I'll go to the other Andrew then. Eric is asking if this changes in this scheme subject to January 2021 in general, and what a completely a different question, but just to put it out there, if there's a set stocking rate per hectare.
So, I'll answer the first bit. It's probably the easier. In short, no. There's not going to be any changes. The only difference there will be is there'll be slight differences in text within the contract. Because there'll be certain elements with regards within the contract that are referred to EU, and obviously there's certain elements. So those elements are currently being revised, and obviously that's going to be redone in January. So the scheme itself is not going to change. All that's going to change is probably some text in a contract that you'll receive as part of your offer letter. With regards stocking levels, as I say, it comes down to what type of scheme that you're looking at. So under each of the options, that'll give you a stocking level or a stocking density. So very much for the conifer schemes, we used for the conifer species, it's 2,500 stems to the hectare. But for the broadleaf element of the scheme, it'll be down to 1,100 stems to the hectare. So obviously you're opening that space up as well. However, for a native woodland, you're looking at 1,600 stems to the hectare. And again, for an agroforestry scheme, it can be up to 400 stems per hectare, or as little as 400 stems per hectare. So again, it comes down to what the options are that you're looking at. As part of an application, there will be a set criteria of what your species mix must comprise of and what the stocking of that species mix will need to be. So yeah, that's it's worth having a look. As I say, it's not one size fits all, unfortunately.
So here's another question, a practical question from Simon, that's asking whether operations to its successful establishment include clearing gorse, and that would be for Andrew Kitching.
So there is an element of funding associated with gorse clearance. I think I'll need to double check the criteria for it, but I think it's very much associated on size. But I could be wrong, and I'm happy to be proven wrong if that is. But there is the actual detail is up online. We have it available online to show exactly what size and what the criteria is for the activity. So there is some certain activities like gorse clearance that could be funded under our Woodland Creation Scheme. Yes.
A question for the other Andrew Whiteford. Would you consider, in general, would you encourage other farmers to plant trees after your experience?
Yeah, I would encourage them if using the reasons that Andrew also had on his slide. If you go through the process and it's ticking boxes for you, then definitely go with it, because the positives that can be generated if you target it for the reasons, if you're wanting better accessibility, but you're wanting to utilize areas on your farm which aren't necessarily getting utilized, then yeah, go for it. And I think especially if there's going to be funding, and it seems to be there's going to be a push from UK governments to try and push more towards this sort of forestry, but it has to be for the right reasons. You have to know why you want to do it, and make sure because it is once they're planted, that's them. It took generations to clear these areas for farming. So it's a big step. If you were wary, there's you can always go into it with plant a few areas. We kind of went fairly gun ho into it, but it's because we already had established woodland there in the first place. It was already part of the farming landscape, so it wasn't, if you took half your farm out for planting, that's a big step. But you could go into it with a smaller scheme and see if that impacts on your farming. If it doesn't really impact too much on your output, and it actually has enabled you to be more efficient on your better land, then there's positive effects both ways. And it does require some management. If you plant trees on good areas, there is going to be a lot of grass growth as well. So we found that we had to monitor that to try and still create a good establishment. And with the whole, if it enables you to link areas up with a roadway, it has to be why you're linking up. Do you need to access this area? And if it helps your farming system as well, then that's a positive. But I would encourage people to use it as a tool to help the rest of your farming businesses. But it needs you can do it for the right reasons for your farm as well. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people to do it.
That's great. The other, Andrew, we're coming to an end, so this is going to be the last question. But Erica, who asked about the tree stock, is also asking, what about animal stock in this schemes?
So as I said at the beginning, what we would look at doing is, if you're looking to create a woodland, it really wants to be stock proof. So we wouldn't really want any stock in that area. As I said, there's the agroforestry scheme if you're still wanting to look at a grazing between the trees. That is available. Let's say that's a lower stocking. The slight difference between that one from a standard woodland creation scheme is just the requirements of the protection. So rather than actually protecting an area which we are planting, under that one, the actual trees themselves get a bit more of a substantial protection individually. So therefore, obviously, that helps if you are looking to graze between the trees themselves. But from a standard sort of production or a standard native woodland scheme, we wouldn't be looking to have any stock within that area. What tends to happen is they tend to knock the trees over, especially if in their tubes. I've been on quite a few sites where stock has got in and there's a number of tree tubes on the floor, usually from stock rubbing up against the tube, and obviously what happens there is all that just happens is you get failure in your establishment, and considering you're being paid to maintain a set stocking density, obviously all it does is provide you with further maintenance within that sort of woodland establishment phase of the scheme.
Andrew, how long would you say, if people are wanting to graze these areas at some point in the future, how many years should they allow the trees to create that good establishment and that without potentially impeding too much? If that is a priority for people, they don't want to completely take these areas out. How long should they last if they are wanting to allow sheep to graze in amongst it?
Oh, it's a difficult one. I suppose you can't really put a timescale on, because it really depends on how successful your establishment is in the first place. That's the difficulty. Obviously, what you need to do is try and the problem you're going to have is that by the time you get sort of more canopy closure, that's obviously where your ground fauna is, especially if you're dealing with sort of a spruce. Your vegetation underneath is probably going to be a lot lower, and it's probably kind of adverse effect to what you're probably wanting to graze in your stock in the first place. So it gets a very difficult one, and that's why I think majority of them tend to try and keep it as stock free as possible. Really, it has a knock-on effect onto your establishment, but then it's by the time it's got to that stage, your actual fact, the actual grassland underneath is probably being outcompeted by the canopy of the trees themselves.
Great. We're almost on the on time. So I was wondering, just in case any of the two, Andrews or Peter, have any last ideas or any last comments that they want to make. If you don't, it's not mandatory.
No, I've got nothing to add, really. No.
I mean, I would possibly say it's, whenever thinking about this, it's about creating a balance between what is your most expendable land, but what will actually create a good return from it if you do put forestry. So a good knowledge of how, an understanding of how your farming practices interlink with the land you have, is quite a good way of thinking if forestry is suitable. Can you go without this piece of land, and can you then still create the same output on the rest of your farm if you improve the soil and the grazing of the rest of your farm? Can it win both ways? So doing a sort of, even if it's just looking at a map of your farm and saying, well, which areas do I hardly use? Is there areas of the farm that don't perform that great anyway? Even if you find that with every farm, there's areas of the farm that sheep, for example, they go out and they get lean, or there's areas that you might lose a few more lambs, and if that's the case, then maybe it is good to might think, what else can I get out of this block of land? Is it better to put it into woodland, and push the rest of the farm a bit more? I think that's a good sort of thought process of thinking about doing it.
Super. Thank you so much. Andrew, Kitching, any last words?
Well, I mean, just really to say that if you are looking at it, it's probably worth, as probably been reiterated a few times, is have a word with the sort of the local conservancy and the local woodland officer. They'll be able to give you a good steer right from the beginning of what do you need to consider as part of developing a woodland creation scheme. Obviously, the last thing you want to do is pull everything together that's required and then find out there's a stumbling block that's going to either stop the scheme or needs vast alterations to a scheme sort of halfway through. So by speaking to the local woodland officer, it gets that idea. You've got a good understanding of what are the constraints, what are the sensitivities for the area, and what needs to be thought about, and then hopefully that gives you a better steer going through that process, rather than say getting halfway through and finding there's something that needs to be considered even more. So yeah, that's probably one thing I'd say.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all the three speakers. You've been brilliant tonight. And thank you as well for agreeing to be part of this late on the evening. I know that you probably have other things to use your evenings in, but thank you so much for spending the time, for sharing your experience. I think it's been really, really interesting. For everybody, we're going to be sending a follow-up email with lots of resources that might help you. But if you have any particular questions, feel free to either send me a mail or send Andrew K a mail. We'll be more than happy to sort of like trying to answer your questions or find the resources that you might want or need. Keep an eye on our events page, because we're probably going to start next year with lots of events around woodland creation, around trees. So do keep an eye on this and have lovely holidays, because we're almost there, everybody. So have a great evening, and again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.